Oh, direct painting. Yeah, it had to come to that, didn't it? So this is actually two separate questions. I think we can put them up probably at the same time. Did the Boston School painters scumble and glaze? And they're related. This is related to, in part, to a certain interpretation of direct painting. Where the next question is, could you please elaborate a little more about the difference between direct painting and indirect painting? So yeah, let's do the direct and indirect question. There are words like that used historically in different ways by different painters. I have to probably confess to using it the way I feel like using it. Usually I do try to, as it were, do it by the book, but sometimes you just get simply into these habits of using expressions like that because of what they mean to you. And but nevertheless, let's talk about direct painting, what it is and what it isn't, at least. And to do that requires you to think about two different aspects of painting. So you'll see a discussion, for example, with Degas, and I'm trying to remember if Degas himself was talking about it or was somebody else discussing him. But he referred to painting from life as direct painting, and that's not what most people are thinking when we use that word direct painting. But so there are meanings like that, So you set up a model and you put your easel up and you paint directly from life right in front of you, just there. Now, obviously, the opposite of that would be to do drawings, do preliminary work, and then work aside from the model, and never do the painting directly from the model. And there are reasons to do those sorts of things. One is just simply that you become such a slave of a model. If you're doing an imaginative painting, and you have a model sitting there in front of you, before you know it, it'll look like. And I laugh because Paxton has, I mentioned the Navy murals, but there are some others like that, where other people have done the same thing, where they literally took a literal model and painted a literal model when they should have painted an ideal. It should have looked like a Greek character, this figure of this woman, and it looked like Nellie Murphy, the model that we would see, posing for other paintings by. And you see the same thing, as I've mentioned before, with people like Veronese, just painting the girl on the block or his wife or somebody as the model for, and literally dressed in the clothes of his day, but as the model for Moses' sister, shall we say. And the discovery of Moses and the bulrushes by these Italian women in these very full dresses, shimmering, shiny, satiny things. And looking fully like themselves, making no attempt to make them look like they were Jews of a given time, like they were part of the Egyptian culture. None of that stuff was going on. As I mentioned before, Ang was quite good at that in his own right. But you can see the need to paint away from the model, or to have your drawing and then make the drawing. And Degas would do it by, he said, tracing over and over to get it to conform to an idea that was generating in his mind, more than to conform more and more to the literal world right in front of you. So, yeah, I suppose the epitome of direct painting in that way of working is like the photographic likeness of somebody sitting there in front of you. But that's just the idea of painting from life. I mean, that idea of direct painting. The other idea, though, and it's probably easier to talk about indirect painting to describe something else. Indirect painting, Maxfield Parrish is a wonderful example. I say there are wonderful examples of his work in which you can see the outline understudy traced on. Then you can see some of the trees painted in blue, and then you can see some of the trees or other parts with another layer of glaze. All that is what we call indirect. So that wouldn't matter where you took it from. If you said indirect, meaning that you were making something up out of your head and not painting it directly from life, that would be one. And this other one, though, of just simply doing drawings and all these sorts of things. I'm sorry, that having been said. But now doing the whole process indirectly, so that you were doing first drawing and then perhaps a grisaille and then perhaps a rough color version, and then you gradually build up to finally you're getting yourself to where you are trying to be. Gérôme worked rather like that. It appears from the preliminaries that we have, some of the preliminary studies. The Boston School didn't. So the Boston School is a school of, in that interpretation of that word, of direct painting. So the Boston School their idea was to make it as like as you can the first time, put down a note and leave it, So you're trying to make the likeness of the note, much like any impressionist would. You're trying to hit the color note and do drawing with an accurate color note. So when impressionists scatter different colors around the page, they're actually trying to do research so they can see what colors they're going to be drawing with. They're beginning to set up what you would have to call the color scheme. So it's not, and even though we are talking, by the way, even as impressionists, Boston School impressionists, of painting thick over thin, painting, keeping the first layers thinner than those secondary ones, the significant reason for that for us is just simply because if you put down a fat chunk of paint, it's going to take a mercilessly fatter one, to adjust it to the color you're looking for. So we put down just the right amount of paint that when you add something to it, does it still become thick, but the right amount of paint is one that has absolutely got the color quality you want. And then you adjust that color quality. So that's an interesting aspect of that, but it's still, everything is indirect in one sense. I mean, you put down something and correct it, in one sense it's indirect. But so to me, the model the Boston School considers both. We sit down, everything is painted from life, and we use painting. We make it as like as we can the first time, in that direct way. There's not an underpainting and then a secondary pile of stuff or whatever, layers after layer after layer. And that's probably the most straightforward, and I think simplistic and maybe at times, but straightforward use that I make of the word direct painting. Words like alla prima and what are the other ones? These words come to mind. I'm trying to think of the second and third ones that are sort of out there. Are, in theory at least, are similar, right? It's all at a blow. You're just doing it all at once. The Boston School guys, all of them actually, would take days to do pictures. That wasn't an all at once. It wasn't a one-shot thing. But the start was very complete. It was a succinct statement of the essential qualities of the observed world in front of you, so much so that you could say, this is going to be worth finishing. This is going to be worth bringing to the level of development that I would bring my, that I might bring any good painting to. I was trying to get careful saying that because it really boils down to there's a different idea of how you push a painting through. The way of working in the Boston School, any of the pictures the Boston School guys start can be brought to a finish as crisp and noodled, if you want to put it that way, as a Paxton, as was typical of Paxton. But they go so much for the beauties of the relationships, and they're so accurate with them in the early phase, excuse me, that so frequently they come to these astonishing beauties in the unfinished state. The relationships are so true, and the perceptions, the accomplishment of the perception of beauty that they have is so telling that they're literally sitting there in the presence of everything you would call aesthetic, the pure magic of that painting has to offer. The purest of magic that painting has to offer is sometimes sitting there. I refer you to the, and maybe I can have my producer put it up on the screen, but I refer you to the painting by Benson of this older woman and two children all sitting in white in the woods. A most remarkable, as it were, unfinished, unpushed painting that's about as stunning as pictures get from the point of view of just pure visual magic. And but of course, so many of us who are completely obsessed with realism today would not know what that means and would be, rather like Gamble, who is kind of like the father of a lot of new realism. Was actually had a different model. He actually says in his essay about Paxton that he believed that Paxton noodled up paintings to the right degree, that all paintings ought to be worked up to. You know what I mean? I'm sorry, I'm putting words in his mouth. I'm not saying it in his words, but those kinds of thoughts are very interesting thoughts. But I'm wandering now into the nature of a finish and not just talking about direct painting. But the direct painter does want to put down, that is to say, the Boston School direct painter. And that's what I'm really here to talk about. That's what I know. The Boston School direct painter wants to make a likeness so beautifully in the first part that it could be left. That model is very different from the indirect painting in the Baron Gros conversation that you hear about. Baron Gros is reported to have said that you want to, and I think I may have quoted this on one of these before, but you wanted to be able to sell the painting. If you died, your family should be able to sell the painting. It would be so much in harmony with itself. And direct painting does that. It's all the horses at once. You have all the colors working. The color scheme is there. All the significant players are out there doing the right thing in relation to each other. And the second levels, to whatever extent they exist, are all harmonized with that sort of thing. So that the painting at any point along the way is in harmony with itself and with the visual impression in front of you, even when it's not pushed to any level of noodling. And I like to suggest that painting, the New Necklace by Paxton, is an example of that level of sort of pushing a thing to it till it almost becomes like a 19th century Jerome or something like that. What was the other point, though? I wanted to make a secondary point here. What was it I just said? Yeah, the idea was that an indirect painting will look odd at different points. It will look, like the Maxfield Parrish. You'll see all this drawing, and then you'll see some blue, half and half sort of blue grisaille, and then you'll see some parts finished. And so it has a very queer effect of being not treated all over the place at once. And therefore the picture doesn't, it holds interest, but only as a bit of shop knowledge, method knowledge. But it loses, it has no pictorial unity in the best sense of that word. Direct painting, the way the Boston School does it, truly does have that. So I put those side by side. You look at any half-finished work virtually by any painter doing it indirectly, and you will find that is characteristic. That there are these moments, these bad moments when you're between worlds, so to speak. Yeah, I think that pretty much closes it out. Oh, no, there was another question. Let me follow up on that. So the second part of that question, and both of these actually were coming from Gabriel. Yeah. Was it? Oh, yeah. Actually, I thought there were two different people, but they're both from Gabriel. So the Boston School painters, do they scumble and glaze? And that's a bit of follow-up. Now, you would argue, as you're painting, that you do whatever it takes. And painters, Boston School painters are they'll do that too. But that's not characteristic. It's not typical of the Boston School to slip around doing scumbling and glazing. They typically paint an area. They put down a spot and leave it, and they adjust the spot wet into wet, typically. Now, there are certain passages on a tarbell when you can see him sort of gashing across an edge with, like down a side with sort of horizontal hack marks down that side. I mean, that thing is probably the nearest thing to like what a scumbling would be, but I'm trying to remember if I've ever seen anything. I mean, I can see them potentially doing it, and Monet did it. Monet did it in the course of painting. I mean, he would have layer after layer of thick paint built up, and then you could see that he's dragged something across. But in the process, I mean, what he's doing is he's trying to improve the general color of that area by adding more little notes to sort of adjust that cumulative effect of what was already there. So yeah, in that way, a Boston School painter might also do that. They might do it outdoors. I can't say that I've ever taken particular note of it because it isn't the most typical thing. But that's a worthy discussion, and all painters will do whatever it takes, providing they don't lose the unity of the treatment, so that they don't look like their picture is oddly different in one part from another, which is a fundamental thing. 'Cause that's the unity of treatment, if you want to call it that, which is one of those unities that exists in the arts. So. Yeah, subscribe, comment, further questions on the subject, share, and thank you very much. I look forward to another one. I think it's going to be a week away now. All right, see you later.